however they choose at the local level through local control to help regulate gun violence. And I have studies, and we're going to talk about them. I have study after study after study that talks about generally applied restrictions on gun ownership does not drive down gun violence. Now, what does are laws relating to discharge, which the city still has power of, and laws related to prohibited people. And in my view, that discussion ought to happen in this body, where we can go through the policy discussion and people have the opportunity to weigh in on a statewide basis before their gun rights are taken away. Now, LB 68, as it is before you today, in the amendment, there is an amendment, and Senator Moranti in a moment will introduce that amendment. And that amendment is the product of a significant and intensely negotiated compromise. When I watched the debate of the predecessor to LB 68, LB 289 last year when it was brought by Senator Ebke, I watched almost every minute of that debate. And significantly, there's two things that came through on the debate. One was the opposition from the Omaha police. And their opposition was based in real-world historical examples and experience with their attempts to fight the particular gang problems that exist in Omaha. And the second thing that came through was that if we could have a compromise that addressed Omaha's concerns and addressed the major material concerns, that, boy, we could get a bill that we could rally around. And I took those lessons to heart, and over the last couple of months have helped negotiate, very hard negotiation. We gave up a lot for Second Amendment gun rights holders, as well as others. And we negotiated compromise, and I want to publicly thank Senator McDonald for his tireless effort in that process. And what we did through that compromise is we did a couple things. Primarily what we did is we allowed Omaha to have the tools to fight the gang violence that it has shown consistently it needs to fight those problems. So Omaha has retained some of those tools. Now, those tools are already on the books in Omaha. There's no other city in the state, and we're going to hear about those tools, I think with some of those amendments. We're going to hear about some of those tools. Only Omaha has them, and Omaha wanted to keep a couple, and so we agreed. Now, anytime, anywhere, on any bill with anybody, I will discuss and negotiate. My door has been open. And I've told that to the interested parties, the opponents, and others. And we've had a lot of productive conversations, but far and away, the group that had the biggest issue and that worked the hardest and longest to reach a compromise was the Omaha police and the related Omaha metro area law enforcement officers. I'm proud of that compromise. I look forward to talking about that. I look forward to talking about Second Amendment and Article 1, Section 1 rights and why LB 68 fits within that scheme without the type of collateral consequences that I think we might hear. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Hilgers. As the clerk indicated, there are amendments from the
arguments are, well, it might increase violence, but the data that I've talked about is that these restrictions of general application do not increase gun violence. In fact, the latest literature suggests that they could decrease or increase gun violence because they disarm the law-abiding citizens. At the same time, we've asked police officers and the police organizations to, talk to us about the ordinances that you need to fight crime. We've had that conversation. We'll continue to have that conversation. The answer that we've received is that, hey, in Omaha, we have X, Y, and Z that are really important to us, so we'd like to keep those. And that's the compromise, hard-fought compromise that we've reached. Now, what I haven't heard yet today is an argument that says, hey, this really will increase gun violence. I mean, there's been some suggestion, right? There's been some discussion, suggestion that maybe it would, but I think the data is compelling, the research is compelling, our common sense is compelling that this would not. So the remaining arguments are, well, maybe this will open up to places we don't want guns to go, and I can assure you the intent of LB 68 is not to allow guns into Pinnacle Bank or in other places, and I strongly believe that state law LB 68 is not intended to take away the state's powers and to have cities enforce state law or federal law. This only talks about ordinances that are originated by the cities, not by the states. And the last thing we sort of heard is, although the discussion died down a little bit, was what about the lawsuits? And I think we've discussed this, and I understand the concern at first blush. I certainly do understand. We don't want to open up our municipalities to lawsuits. I get it. However, If they just repeal their ordinances, they will not be sued. And if they are sued, it will be essentially a declaratory judgment action, a facial challenge to the statutes. The reality is those are not overly burdensome for organizations to file. There aren't a lot of attorney's fees. So the notion that this will open up municipalities and public political subdivisions to great exposure and lawyers just going after these political subdivisions, I just don't think is borne out. And the related concern is, well, what we really don't want to do, this is just an opportunity for groups, guns rights supporting groups, to go after our subdivisions. And in other jurisdictions, Senator Blood has circulated some news, there's been other places where maybe in different cases and different examples at different times under different laws, there's been an issue. But that's not the case here. What we have done is incorporate a general standard of organizational standing that gives any group, whether it's an existing group today, like the NRA or the NFOA or some other, or a group in the future, like the ACLU, I mentioned the Nebraskans for Civic Reform, or some other, that may want to take up this right, this ability to fight for their members. That's something we see all the time. It's not controversial. It does not expose political subdivisions to the civil liability that has been suggested. So I think that's where we are in the balance. I think, in my view, the Second Amendment fundamental rights and the upside of giving our citizens the opportunity to lawfully hold a firearm without violating city laws or becoming a prohibited person without their knowledge outweighs some of those concerns. I take those concerns very seriously. I've taken them seriously throughout this process and will continue to do so. But I think it strongly weighs in the balance in favor of LB 68. I would urge a red vote on Senator Chambers' motion and agreeing on the rest. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hilgers.